Hello, I'm Dr. Gary Falk from the University of Pennsylvania, Division of Gastroenterology and Hepatology, and I'm here today to go over my article entitled Tips for High Quality Endoscopy in Eosinophilic Esophagitis. Now, this is a very common indication for endoscopy, and what I'd like to offer in the few minutes with you is what I see as key tricks to the trade. So first of all, if you are going to be doing someone who may or may not have eosinophilic esophagitis, you want to be prepared and have a high index of suspicion. So typically a young male with atopic features who has dysphagia, that's someone out of eosinophilic esophagitis central casting, and you want to be prepared in that examination to expect to see features of EOE. Secondly, if you're going to be doing an endoscopy in someone with suspected eosinophilic esophagitis, make sure you have all the tools of the trade on hand. That means a regular endoscope, possibly a pediatric endoscope if you suspect narrow caliber esophagus, and necessary dilators, be they through the scope or be they Savary dilators. An important caveat in endoscopy for people with suspected eosinophilic esophagitis is to make sure that index endoscopy is done off of PPI therapy. If the endoscopy is done on PPI therapy, you may miss the diagnosis and you may be going round and round over time. Once you're set to go, make sure if someone has known eosinophilic esophagitis that you know what therapy that they are on, and please be sure to document it on the endoscopy report. These patients tend to move around quite a bit, and when you try to dissect out what therapy they've been on and whether it's worked or not, you often don't know as it's not documented in the endoscopy report. Now that you're ready to go, principle number one of endoscopy at EOE is to go slow. So intubate the esophagus carefully and don't have your first peak in the mid-esophagus because strictures may be high up in the esophagus, narrow caliber esophagus that's unexpected may be encountered, and lo and behold, you are left with a rent, which can be unpleasant for the patient as well as for you. As such, intubate, take a breath, and take a look and see what you're dealing with. And if there's a proximal stricture, it is totally reasonable to get biopsies to see where you are and call it a day. If there's no strictures, then you can proceed with your examination and be prepared to score the examination using the EREF system, which offers a standardized language for eosinophilic esophagitis. Is there edema or not? Are there rings or not? Is there exudate or not? Are there furrows or not? And is there a stricture? These can be found in endoscopic writing systems, but to say it looks like eosinophilic esophagitis is not really adequate. The EREFs have been validated and offers your common terminology. The EREF should be determined on entry because on the way in, you may knock off features of exudate, which is one of the classic inflammatory features of EOE. Everyone knows that you need to do 6 biopsies in the esophagus at a minimum, 2 in the distal in one jar, and 2 each in the mid and proximal esophagus in a second jar. Your biopsies should best be targeted to areas that are most involved with inflammatory features. That's edema, furrows, and exudate. In addition, it is important to remember that endoscopy is a tool not only for diagnosis, but to assess response to therapy. There is a disconnect between symptoms and endoscopic and histologic findings, and the goal of therapy is deep remission characterized by absence of symptoms, endoscopic normalization of at least inflammatory features and preferably fibrostenotic features, and information on histology that suggests less inflammation. Those are the aspirational goals for all of our patients. And the only way to assess whether you've made deep remission is to do endoscopy and biopsies and not to rely on symptoms. So when you institute therapy, we typically do an endoscopy 6 weeks after dietary therapy and 8 to 12 weeks after pharmacologic therapy. And if you change therapy, you need to do the same because otherwise you're not sure where you go. Untreated eosinophilic esophagitis can lead to long-term stricturing and narrowing. Finally, if there are refractory symptoms in someone with eosinophilic esophagitis, the differential diagnosis is wide. It could include non-response to therapy. It could include non-compliance to therapy. It could include excellent response to therapy, but ongoing fibrostenotic features. It could also include an entity described by the Northwestern group as esophageal hypersensitivity, esophageal hypervigilance and anxiety, in which patients with complete deep remission histologically and endoscopically still have symptoms. That is not treated by increasing pharmacologic therapy directed at EOE. Thank you very much for your attention, and best of luck in approaching eosinophilic esophagitis in the future.